Welcome to Simple Conversation with ASG.
Follow your new favorite podcast host with a link in the description.
So tell me, who is Andy Smith?
Oh, there's a great question. Well, Andy Smith is a guy who grew up in the Shetland Islands, lived a fairly sort of standard life, I suppose. Went to university, had quite a successful career, and basically tried to drink himself into oblivion whenever the opportunity arose. And that's something I think that growing up on a small island in a pub, what could possibly go wrong? Stuff like that leaves a bit of a mark. And it took me until I was 50 years old to finally sort that out. And since I have, my life has changed beyond all recognition. I've done lots of really interesting things that I never thought I could do in a million years. And I guess I kind of feel like I've been given a bit of a second shot at life, if that's probably not over egging the cake, as it were.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously the stereotypical being from the UK, like born on just an island with pubs everywhere around you, and that's something that I think I have kind of like a basis of an American audience, and they probably wouldn't really understand that background. But there was something that I actually wrote down to touch on was I would say I wouldn't call this specific part UK drinking culture, but the growing up stage through school of like maybe 10 to 15 where it's around you a lot. Did you notice, like, now that you look back, do you think that kind of kickstarted that addiction you fell into?
Well, let me kind of, I guess, paint the scene. I mean, the Shetland Islands is a group of nearly 100 islands right off to the north of Scotland. So, almost closer to Norway than it is most of Scotland. So it's an incredibly remote, it's an amazingly beautiful and just exciting place for so many reasons to grow up as a young kid. We moved up there when I was 7 years old. We got a big old house that was borderline uninhabitable on a small island that's 7 miles by 3 with 300 people on it. So growing up in that kind of environment, there are lots of adventures to be had, but there are not a lot of the sort of normal distractions that you would normally see if you grew up in a town or a city or things like that. So you had to make your own entertainment. And I think, you've touched on it in terms of and it is changing, but there is certainly, going back to when I was growing up, a big kind of drinking culture. It's quite exciting to go and get yourself a bottle of cider and go and, sit in the little at the side of the football pitch or the swings or the little play park or something with your mates. And it's a bit edgy, it's a bit dangerous, and it's what the grown-ups do. And but the culture very much where I grew up was that basically, as a young man anyway, the more that you could drink, the more of a man you were. It was kind of like a rite of passage. And I remember even at the age of 13 being challenged to drink a bottle of whiskey, which I did. Didn't stay down for long, and the implications were relatively severe, but believe you me, that did not put me off. And I think just you've got this whole culture where it's just the done thing, and you don't really realize how much some of these experiences, some of these influences kind of carry with you over the course of your life. And funnily enough, one of my kind of early childhood memories, I mean, after I got sober, after really getting to a very dark place with my drinking, one of my sort of childhood memories that kind of came back to me in terms of sort of relevance on this journey. I remember I was probably 8 or 9 years old. At New Year, we would go and visit other people's houses. There was our house, which was the pub on the island. But then when that closed, you would go and you would travel to other people's houses and go, and people would have fiddles and accordions, and it was extraordinary. The community was amazing. But I remember sitting, and there's a really lovely guy that grew up on the same island as me, and when I was 8 or 9, he was probably about 20 years old, and his name's Brian, and he was sitting in the corner, and I was sitting sort of chatting away to somebody else, and I remember somebody pointing at him and said, "See Brian over there, he can drink a case of Tennent's Lager." And so for those of you who are not from the UK, Tennent's Lager is kind of like the real supermarket lager. It's the biggest brand, but it's kind of it's the stuff that kind of everybody drank.
Liquidized cardboard.
It's it's not great stuff, but I remember somebody saying, "See Brian, he can drink a case of Tennent's Lager and still stand." And it's only really now I kind of understand the impact that had on me, because as a young boy, I felt like I just met Batman. This guy was a superhero as far as I'm concerned. I wanted to be him. But not only that, I wanted somebody to talk about me like that. The kind of the reverence in the voice of, and just little things like that. They shape you. They shape your your attitude towards some of these things. So, and it's funny that when I was kind of trying to sort my own drinking out, much later in life, one of the things that I really had to fight against was that I felt like if you didn't drink, you were a failure. The size of your manhood was measured by how far down a bottle of famous grouse Scotch whiskey you could get. And it took a while for me to kind of reframe that and realize that, you know what, actually, to be able to say no in an environment where everything is trying to get you to behave in a certain way, that is an act of strength, not weakness. But boy, it took me a while to really understand that.
Yeah, I've noticed it a lot in Ireland too. It's probably a little bit more intense in Ireland because there is a drinking history. But I've always wondered that, and something I've always kind of wanted to ask someone who is involved with people with alcohol addictions and trying to fizzle alcohol out of their lives is, why do you think in the UK it is such an achievement by how much you can drink? Because even in nights out, I see it as people that maybe they look a little drunk, but they'll try and over exaggerate how many drinks they've had. I never understood it, because you could just say how many you do have, go home with more money in your pocket.
Yeah, no, that's really true. And I think it's kind of hard to know where it started from, but yeah, I think it's fair to say it's pretty much embedded in the culture. Other cultures, if you go to somewhere like France, for example, they will sit and have a small glass of red wine with their lunch, and they will make it last the entirety of the meal. And that's it. They will stop there. Whereas there just is this kind of momentum behind this this culture. Now it is changing, and if you look at things like our approach to cigarettes, for example, in the 60s and the 70s, about 80% of adults smoked cigarettes, whereas now it's probably around about 15% at the most. So things do sometimes take a generation to change, and we're seeing actually a big difference with drinking as well. And I have a bit of a theory about that. Why kids are kind of shunning alcohol? I think it's now that about a third of under 25s don't drink alcohol at all. And the only way I can kind of square it away is to think that when I was growing up, you would go out, you would get completely and utterly blasted, and the following day you would meet up with your mates, everybody's hungover, And then we would all kid ourselves that, we'd had this great night, and nobody could really remember it. Nobody could kind of understand what had really happened, but we kind of equated the bigger the hangover with the more impressive than the night that we'd had. And there was never anything to challenge that belief because nobody had a camera. And whereas now I think there is real jeopardy for young people to go out and get themselves, completely slaughtered the way we used to do. And because then everybody takes a picture of you, you're all over social media. I've seen people, getting sick on themselves and all this kind of stuff. And, you don't want a permanent record of that, but also that feedback loop, I think, gets broken as well, because you can look at a picture of yourself, in the early hours of the morning when you don't remember the picture being taken, and you look at it and you kind of go, I'm not sure I'm having such a good time there. It doesn't look like I'm having a great time. And so that kind of feedback link is broken. So I think we are seeing quite a big shift. Much more people are talking about it now. When I first started doing what I do now in terms of helping people in 2017, nobody was talking about this on social media, things like that. I've now got a big Facebook group that's got 34,000 people in it, all talking very openly about it. A lot of people from all over the world, a lot of Americans in there. And I think it's becoming much more of the conversation where people are just starting to question this stuff, and not necessarily, not being judgmental about it or anything, but just kind of going, is this actually right? Is this working for me? Because, alcohol destroys a lot of lives, and yet we still kind of kid ourselves that it's this kind of great thing to do. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-alcohol at all, but I've seen too many times, and I've experienced personally what it can lead to.
So when you then grew up a bit and you were maybe out of your teenage years a little, and you had you had access to more money, you had access to better places to go drinking, it was maybe more acceptable for your age to go and drink. Did you see it like kind of snowball really quickly, or was it gradually over time it started getting worse and worse?
I think it's snowballed. That's a good question. I think obviously at university, you're going out, you're partying with your mates and having a great time. And I absolutely loved my university years. And then when I got my first kind of big job, I joined Marks and Spencer in their management training, and then was catapulted over to a part of the country in the northwest of England that I'd never been to before. And I really experienced loneliness for the first time. Staying in a house hundreds of miles away from my friends. It was such a cultural shift from, being the life and soul of the party at university. And I used alcohol then to start to cope with that. It was, started with a 4-pack of beers each night to just kind of take the edge off and watch a bit of telly or whatever. And then the 4-pack becomes 6, becomes 8. And, next thing you know, you kind of can't do without it. So it was something I think, and I would imagine anybody who's struggled with this would probably identify. There are times when it feels really extreme, where you kind of go, I'm really drinking a lot because of the circumstances of my life. And then sometimes the circumstances shift. Maybe you get a new partner, maybe you start a new job, and you've got something that perhaps makes you look at yourself in a slightly different way. So you start to behave a bit differently. But this stuff inevitably tends to come back to grab a hold of you again. And I certainly experienced that over the years. Relocating my family to the south of England. I actually settled in the north of England from being in Scotland. Prior to that, lots of different jobs, a lot of travel internationally. I used to be getting on a on an airplane and sitting in the business lounge, and used to make it my mission in life to go and drink my body weight in gin and tonic before I got on the plane. It's you look back on it now and you think, oh, it's so many wasted opportunities. But one of the good things that I look back on now is the fact that I've experienced all those things. My pain, my discomfort starts to become a bit of a survival guide for other people. And when I speak to people on the phone and things like that, you can almost feel the relief when they kind of go, okay, I think this guy gets me. And I think since I sorted myself out and I've started to kind of, I suppose, reassess my relationship with life. Life is an adventure. Life, our time on this planet is limited, and the sheer tragedy of just sitting on a sofa, pouring gin and tonic down your throat, or in my case, when you run out of tonic, just neat gin, each evening, and then staggering to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's kind of sad when I look back on it, but it all brought me to this point, and now I make it my mission to try to show people that actually, first of all, you can get over alcohol addiction, and a lot of the narrative out there is it's something that is to be managed rather than healed and moved on from, and that is not my experience. It's not the experience of the people that I've worked with. So to challenge that narrative, but also to show that your life gets better, not worse. And I think, you sometimes get awkward kind of questions from people, and, oh, are you going to be the boring one, or are you going to be picking us all up on all the rubbish that we talk and things like that? And yeah, you've got to navigate all that stuff. But for me, I'm much better at saying yes to things that put a smile on my face. After I got sober, I rode the entire course of the Tour de France on my bike for a kids' charity, and it was utterly life-changing. I actually went back. This was back in 2018. I actually went back and did it again in 2022. I've ridden my bike across the Arctic Circle to raise money for a young girl that is local that needed an assistance dog because she's got a very special kind of very rare type of autism. And I've got another big challenge coming up where there's a bike race that you go in the snow across Alaska. That is a longer term project. But I just do these things because, first of all, raising money for charity makes me feel better about being me. And I spent quite a lot of my life waking up hating myself. I used to call myself all sorts of names. It's like, why are you doing this? It's wrong. What the hell is wrong with you? I went to the AA meetings. I went to a world-renowned hypnotherapist. I was in therapy for 1.5 years, and nothing seemed to make any difference to me. And I just thought, wow, I really am screwed up here. And I just assumed that I was unfixable. And the interesting thing was I was very successful in my professional career. I was managing director of international companies, and the flash car, the fancy house, and all these kind of things. I think you look at some people on the outside and think, wow, you got everything. And inside I was just a total basket case, and I really hated myself. And so it's kind of a nice bit of karma, a nice bit of an antidote to that, to just do things that actually, I think this is why we're here on this planet. We're here to help each other. We're here to try and, ease each other's suffering. And I think it also gives your own suffering a bit of meaning as well.
You mentioned your career at the start, and you went a little bit more onto it there. And something I've wanted to ask you whenever I was researching you, because it was a question that really perked up in my mind, and you can't really ask anybody that is kind of heavily drinking because it would probably be seen as offensive. But when you were at the height of your career and stuff, and you were still drinking really heavily and you're having a really bad opinion of yourself, do you think the guilt of I shouldn't be doing this because of my job, or I shouldn't be doing this to myself because you're going to start to believe that, do you think that guilt really pushed your drinking to another dimension?
Yeah, I think so. If there's one thing I've learned about the whole kind of AA approach and things like that was I found it extraordinarily negative, and I certainly was in that thing. So if you try to kind of beat yourself up to make a change on these sort of things, I think it's pretty rare that you're going to actually be able to sustain it. You've got to turn this into a positive, more forward looking thing. But for sure, I used to drive myself very hard, and I was really good at what I did. I've broken sales records. I have turned companies around and all these kind of things. And to be honest, the only way I could kind of square this away, because I would look at myself on the one hand and go, yeah, I'm reasonably exceptional because I'm the exception to the rule in terms of success. So just maybe this is the price of that. Maybe the only way you can drive yourself this hard is to, obliterate yourself every evening. And I look back on those times now with and I'm not one for regret or anything. I'm very forward looking, but I do sometimes feel curious about what I could have done in those moments, because I look back and I think, wow, I was operating at 6 out of 10, and I was still doing well. At the time, I thought it was 10 out of 10 because that's all I had. But now I feel clearer. I am more resilient. I'm much more patient, because one of the uncomfortable truths about alcohol and relaxation is alcohol actually creates anxiety. If you drink a lot and drink regularly, your body builds up a defense against the depressive effects of alcohol, which is anxiety. Because if it didn't, the amount you drink would literally stop your heart. So you end up managing this elevated anxiety, and the only time you get any relief from it is when you're actually physically drinking. So I was on this roller coaster of waking up in the morning, irregular heartbeat, heart thumping away in my chest, and that horrible nervy jangly feeling, and that would get worse and worse and worse as I went through the course of the day. So I was like in a hurry to get my day done and get back to get back home, and then pop open the bottle, couple of bottles of wine and a few gins or whatever it looked like that evening, and that gave me a relief from it. But obviously the futility of it is that all you're doing is you're setting yourself up for the following day. And it's a bit like wearing shoes that are 2 sizes too small for you, just so you can get the relief of taking them off at the end of the day. It's crazy, but when you get stuck in that cycle, it's quite hard to elevate yourself out of it.
How much do you think being single impacts the amount of alcohol you're going to consume? Because I don't know, maybe if this is just my generation and my age range that would do this, but I notice a lot of people, whenever they come out of a relationship and they're single again, first thing they automatically go to is, I'm going to go out more. I get to go out more. It's almost like they've been in jail for 10 years and they've been released, and the first thing they want to do is go and sit in a very neon lit room that's called a nightclub.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a seductive narrative. I think sitting in a nightclub by yourself is probably one of those things that sounds like a good idea, but it's probably fairly kind of joyless. But we crave, at the end of the day, as human beings, we're social creatures, and you could say that a lot of the people I work with is it. These are the people who are dancing on tables at 2:00 in the morning, and life and soul of the party. It's rarely like that. Quite often, alcohol addiction is a very solo affair. But I think when people are coming out of a relationship, you go through a process, don't you, where it's kind of like, right, I can do whatever I want, and I'm gonna, I am going to let loose. And I think that's a natural and a normal and probably a healthy way to get back to, right, who am I again? Now I'm out of this. But I think, we tend to operate our lives in a wee bit of an equilibrium with the environment. I speak to people who went through lockdown, for example, and their drinking went out of control because actually their one saving grace was they didn't get home until 7:30 at night, and that's when the drinking started. And all of a sudden, they're either on furlough or they're working from home, and you're looking at the clock, and it's okay, 5 o'clock. Oh well, go on, and we'll have some wine, and then 5 o'clock becomes 4 and 3, and then next thing you know, you're drinking at lunchtime, and then you're maybe on a Zoom call with some vodka in your teacup. And I've seen all of those things. So we tend to operate in a kind of a kind of an equilibrium, and sometimes a relationship can be, if you're in a relationship with a partner who doesn't drink very much, then that can put the brakes on a wee bit. Or actually you could be, and I was in this situation with somebody who used to nag me incessantly about every single drop that I drank, and that actually made me drink more. And then when I was released from that, for sure, I went off the rails for a while, but then started to kind of make peace with, okay, who am I? How do I want to make this work? How do I want to live my life? And you start to find that new balance.
You touched on that earlier in the episode, and you've touched on it there recently, that's kind of provoked a thought in my mind, and it's actually reminded me of a quote. But during lockdown, as you said, people's drinking really did go out of control, and I noticed it a lot. Like, definitely that it amped up to a different level. But whenever we came out of lockdown and I went back to work, there was a guy that said that summed it up perfectly, and I think that's something that could have contributed. You'll probably have a lot of experience with this contributor, but people in lockdown found out they really don't like being lonely.
Yeah.
Do you think that pushed the alcohol? That was the reason?
Yeah. I think there's a really interesting experiment that they did, I think probably in the US with rats. And they put a rat in a maze and gave it 2 bottles of water, one of which was laced with, I think, cocaine, and one of which was pure water. And the rat was going around the maze, and eventually it came across both of the bottles, and very quickly ignored the pure water and just started getting itself basically whacked off its face on the cocaine laced stuff. And they repeated the exercise, but this time with a group of rats, and they put all sorts of activities in there. They, ramps for them to go, wheels for them to play on, ball pools. But there were lots of rats in a kind of a family group. And again, they put the two bottles in, and this time the rats ignored the cocaine laced water because it detracted from the experience that they were having. And I think there's a real lesson for that. There's a great TED talk by a guy called Johann Hari who talks about the opposite of addiction being connection. And I think a lot of people feel very disconnected. We operate in this digital world where we feel, in theory, like we're connected to everybody, but actually we're almost connected to nobody. A lot of family structures, people have moved around the country and things like that. And I think loneliness was a big factor, certainly is still a big factor in the UK, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world. And it's a real big factor in people's drinking.
Well, push forward a little bit here now to when you actually started recovering and getting out of your addiction. But
yep,
I've asked a lot of people that have been on the show briefly, not full episodes, but about their addictions and how they got rid of. and they've all went through hundreds of things that didn't work for them. Something I want to ask you, as someone who is an addiction coach and is quite clearly beating that addiction, a very strong one at that. What was the first thing that worked, and how far between was the one that worked and the first one you tried?
That's a great question. And I think this is a game of moments. I think it is, there are moments when things kind of snap into view, and there are moments where you ask yourself different questions and your mindset shifts. So people often ask me, they say, oh, what was it that got you sober? And I with no sense of irony, I say Michael Jackson got me sober. And it's the song, The Man in the Mirror. And there was one particular morning. So again, going back to corporate Andy, had a skinful the night before, rush into a meeting in the car. Whether or not I should have been driving, I don't know. But I was, my anxiety was through the roof, and felt perfectly compos mentis, but I had a long drive ahead of me, and I was coming up to a level crossing, and the lights started to go and the barriers started to come down, and just for a moment I thought, oh, I wonder if I just floor it. I wonder if I'll be able to get across the tracks before the train comes. And had a word with myself, and I just like, don't be blooming stupid, and so I stopped at the barriers, and I was sat there stewing, and the Michael Jackson song, The Man in the Mirror, came on. And of course I'd heard it hundreds, I don't know, thousands of times before, but that first line in the chorus, I'm starting with the man in the mirror, and I'm asking him to change his ways. And it was funny because I was in the car and I was looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and the bloodshot eyes, the dark circles, and I was looking at myself just going, oh boy, is this what it's come to? And I was listening to the lyrics, and that one word, asking, just completely changed everything for me. I'm asking him to change his ways. And I had spent at least 10 years beating the crap out of myself, and question what the hell is wrong with me and all this kind of stuff. And literally I looked at my reflection in the mirror and I asked myself the question out loud. I just went, are you up for this? Are you willing to do what it takes? And it was almost like somebody else answered, and just said, yeah, I will take action. And it was the first time in my life that I really meant it. And that set me off on a path of sort of, okay, I am really good at changing how other people feel about things. I'm a really strong coach. I've won awards for my business acumen, my selling skills, my ability to coach other people. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with me that I can't do this for myself? And that one word, asking, I just thought, right, okay, if I was to take the same approach for me that I do for clients and staff and things like that, what might happen? So I phoned my boss. I was in a job that I really, really hated. And I phoned my boss and said, look, I'm taking the rest of the week off, and went back home. And I went down, there's a little lake near where I live. And I went home. I went to the big old boxes where I'd been on all the coaching courses, personal development stuff. There were kind of different qualifications I got. I went and got all of them and put them in the car, drove down to the car park overlooking this lake, spread everything out over the dashboard. And I just said to myself, right, the answers are in here. I just need to find them. And I spent 3 days, dawn to dusk, just going through stuff and mapping out, if I was, if this was my brother, if this was my, sister or whoever, what guidance would I give them? And I did it from a third party standpoint, and I came up with a process, and I just then committed. I'm like, right, I am going to go through this from start to finish, and I'm going to see what happens. And the irony is that some of these things I had tried before, but I'd only tried them singly, and they'd not quite got me what I wanted. And so I had what was basically a kind of a seven stages of influence, as it were. And so I just worked through it one at a time. I'm like, right, I'm going to do this, and then I will do this, and then I will do this. And I could feel something inside me shifting and changing. And I went back to my partner, Louise, and I said, there's something different here. Something's happened. I think I might be done with this. And she was like, yeah, right. Been here before, sunshine. And by the way, she is not the one that used to nag me about this. She's an amazing woman, and I'm grateful to have her in my life. And she was always acutely worried about me, but came at it from a very different angle. And her influence on me is not to be minimized at all. But I was just, I couldn't quite explain it to her. And I just thought something about this, his something inside me has changed. And I think it's this whole thing. And when I say about the moments, there is a moment where you just look at things anew. There is a moment where you feel almost like a switch flicking inside you. And sometimes life comes along and imposes one of those moments on you through, circumstances, and those things generally tend to be bad things that happen, and they tend to kind of, happen suddenly. It's a knock on the door, it's a phone call, it's things like that. And actually trying to find those moments for yourself without that sort of external push is really hard. And when I'm working with people, and sometimes people are feeling a bit kind of like, oh, I'm not sure I can do this, and I didn't have a good week last week and all this, and I'm just like, look, you're in the game here, and you are still trying. This is not a straight line. There will be good days, there will be bad days, but the very fact that we're still engaged in the process means it's virtually inevitable that you will get to where you want to get to. And you have to be in the game long enough to get these little moments. I liken it to a combination lock. If you can imagine you're trying to unlock something within you, well, if there are 20 numbers in that combination lock, you need all 20, and you need them in the right order. Now, some people, you might have 3 of the 20. Some people, you might have 19 of the 20, and you're looking for that last thing that's going to make all the difference. Or for some people, you've got all 20, it's just they're all jumbled up, and you need somebody to help you make sense of kind of putting them in the right order. But then when it does happen, it feels incredible. It's the most empowering thing. And you then start to ask yourself very different questions, and you go, ooh, this is interesting. Well, I didn't think I was going to be able to do this. What else have I talked myself out of? And this was a part of the thing around the riding the Tour de France. You just start to kind of go, okay, what could be my next challenge? How can I kind of road test what I've just learned about myself? And funnily enough, it was just, I'd read a book about a journalist who had ridden the course of the Tour de France, and it was a very funny book, and how his kind of misadventure in all this, and his kind of grudging respect that he earned for all these guys in Lycra, and I thought it was funny. I just literally Googled ride the course of the Tour de France, and there's this amazing charity called the William Waits Memorial Trust, and I found their website, gave them a call, and said, oh, just this is something I'm thinking about doing one day. Is it something that you do? And they're like, yeah, this is exactly what we do. We ride the entire course 1 week in front of the professionals on the same schedule. And I was like, oh, that sounds amazing. And they said, well, yeah, but unfortunately it's completely sold out for next year. So this was late 2017. And I was like, oh, well, oh, never mind then, eh? And they were like, well, hang on a minute. You can go on the waiting list if you'd like. And I was like, yeah, sure. Here's my name. Here's my number. Here's my email address. And they said, because people do drop out for a whole variety of different reasons. And so I didn't really give it much of a thought. And I was trying to look after myself a bit better and was trying to get down the gym a bit. And then a few weeks later, the phone rang. And they said, oh, hi, it's Sarah from William Waits here. Just to let you know, somebody's dropped out. You're next on the list. And there is a place for you if you want to do it. But we need an answer in 2 hours. Otherwise, we're going to move to the next one on the list. And I was like, okay. And bearing in mind at this point, I didn't actually own a bike. I was like, oh, God. So I went to the lovely Louise and I said, look, these guys have phoned me back. And she asked me a really interesting question. She said, well, first of all, if you do it, will you put the training in? And I was like, yeah, I this is really exciting to me. And then she asked me the big question. She said, well, if you say no, and I'd put myself in a situation where if I wasn't going to do it, I had to actually say no. She said, if you say no, how are you going to feel? And I said, well, I think I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And she said, well, there's your answer. And I said, yeah, but it's kind of, and this is where your conscious mind starts to kind of throw in. It's like, yeah, but it's 3 weeks. And it's like, what are you going to do? We had a young son and it's this and that. And she said, look, don't worry. We'll work all this stuff out. If you want to do it, then phone them up and say yes. And sometimes I think in life, there are a million reasons not to do something and maybe only one to do it. And it got a hold of me and I was like, I really want to do this. I can't explain it. To this day, I can't explain it. But all I can tell you is 3 weeks on the road in France. I learned more about myself at the age of 52 than the previous 52 years had ever taught me. I've read all the books on leadership, on stoicism, on how your subconscious mind works. And in those 3 weeks, I finally went, I get it. I understand. And I started to understand how I work. Because if you're slogging your way up a mountain on your bike for 3.5 hours, you go to everywhere in your head. It's like, yeah, I can do this. I can smash it. And oh no, this is too hard. I'll never make it to the top and all this kind of stuff. And after a while, you just go, shut the up and get on with it. And, learning how you respond in those kind of situations and the parallels between getting sober and riding the Tour de France are frightening. I mean, it's, the art of doing the impossible definitely has a playbook.
I would say it's quite an extreme change in habit, really.
Yeah, just
going from drinking to Tour de France. But this is a theory that someone on Twitter had it a long time ago. But I have started to adapt it to my own. I've evolved a little bit because I've seen people in my life that have tried to, not even just addiction, just bad habits, tried to quit them, tried to banish them forever, but they always seem to run back to them. And it's like relapsing whenever you're trying to quit an addiction. And my theory is the reason why these people are having such a tough time beating these things, which obviously is a very tough process, but they make it so much harder because they're failing to replace bad habits with good habits.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it. I would say there's kind of two things. So the first one, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. I think if you think about the subconscious mind, which is where addictions, which is where your belief system lies and your real kind of your operating system, it's just like soil and it will grow whatever you plant in it. And the problem is that if you just remove something from your life and you don't put other things in there, then the chances are that, the tiny little reasons that still exist why you did it in the first place are probably going to come back. If you imagine, let's take the soil example. If you imagine that you had a big old part of your garden right down the bottom that you don't really look at, that's all overgrown with weeds and brambles and things like that. You can spend all weekend ripping all the weeds out, digging it over. You get all the pristine soil and everything, and you go, wow, that's amazing. I've done a really good job there. If you then just leave it like that, in 2 months, 3 months, it'll be back how it was before, because everything just grows back in. Whereas if you plant new things, then the weeds cannot proliferate. So it's absolutely right. You need to you need to fill the void. If your focus is on stopping drinking, your subconscious mind does not recognize negatives. So if you go stop drinking, stop drinking, stop drinking, all your subconscious mind is doing is coming up with pictures of you drinking. So at best, it's pointless. And at worst, what you're actually doing is you're reinforcing the behavior that you're trying to leave behind. So, that is a big part of it. I think if you kind of just, remove something from your life and then just sit with your fingers crossed that it won't come back, I think you're setting yourself up for failure in the longer term. And I think the other thing as well is that people often try and use pain to motivate them. Now, pain is a very strong motivator. There's something, I'll speak to somebody and they'll say, I've been told to call you by my wife because she's going to throw me out if I don't sort my drinking out or something like that. It's like, that's really good motivation today. But then every day that passes that you don't get thrown out of the house, then all of a sudden complacency is going to start to come in. And because there is a thing called fading effect bias, where we do not remember the bad stuff. Women, after they've had a kid, they can remember the fact that there was pain, they can remember the discomfort, but they can't actually remember, the actual sensation of it. So we start to kind of look back on it with a slightly different perspective. So pain is great to get you started, but pain will never motivate you in the long run, because after a while you just start to ignore it. So you've got to turn the perspective around. So again, if I use the example of the guy that's going to get thrown out of his house, I always say, look, if that's good, and it's made you book the phone call and it's made you kind of lean into this. However, if you just use that as a motivator, in a few months' time, you're going to feel resentful. You're going to feel like you've kind of given up something for somebody else, and, well, what have you done for me? And you can see how that conversation would play out. I always ask a different question. I say, well, when you were a younger man or a younger woman, what kind of dad did you think you were going to be? What kind of husband did you think you were going to be? And people will often talk very eloquently about, inspiration to their kids, or a, loving husband and things like that. And then I say, well, where is alcohol fitting into that picture? And there's quite often a bit of silence and a bit of like, oh shit, and so, and I say, look, this is not to be viewed as something to remove from your life. This is a return to getting you back. This is about you being the guy that you wanted to be, the husband you want to be, the father you want to be, because, if you love your kids, you love your wife, then when you sort this out and you get to be the person that you were always meant to be, everybody else in your life benefits. But the primary recipient of this has to be you, because you're the one who's going to have to put the work in. And when you turn this into a positive like that, the motivation grows over time. It doesn't deplete in the same way that if you were just using the pain to motivate you, because nobody can keep going back to a painful experience day in, day out to try and motivate themselves. It's just not how we are wired at all. So you have to make this mean something. You have to turn it into a positive. It doesn't have to be the Tour de France. There's a lady that I worked with a number of years ago. She was in my Facebook group, and she said, I've rediscovered my childhood love of crochet. And we all had a bit of a laugh about it. And then she put some pictures of some things that she'd done, and everybody went, "My God, you're amazing at this." And And so she started selling a few bits on Etsy, the website, and was starting to get messages where people were saying, "Oh, I really love that cushion cover that you did. Could you put my baby's name on it?" and things like that. And so she turned this hobby into a little kind of pocket money business type thing. And then she sent me a message, and she said, "Andy, you're not going to believe this. I've just been contacted by my local college to be their crochet instructor on their arts and crafts course." And we both had a real laugh about it, because this was a lady who, the first time I spoke to her, she was in a bit of distress, to say the least. And we just smiled at it and just said, who could have predicted this? And the thing is, when you start to kind of step out of that Groundhog Day type experience, and you start to ask yourself different questions along the lines of, what makes me happy? Then, funnily enough, you start to make different decisions and different choices. And sometimes I am often kind of surprised or not surprised that when I ask people what makes you happy, quite often people go, "I don't know. It's been a long time." And it's like, right, so this is part of the journey. It's to open your eyes and to start to go, right, what does put a smile on my face? Again, life's an adventure. Life is meant to be lived, and you're supposed to enjoy your time on this planet. And if you're in a place where, of your own making, that you feel like you're not living that, it feels bad. And I think a lot of people who, I speak to a lot of partners of people with various different addictions, and they always say to me, "Well, they don't seem to think it's a problem, and they don't get it, and I need them to understand." And I always say the same thing: it's like, don't be fooled. They get it. They know exactly what they're doing. It's just when you think so badly of yourself, you simply cannot bear anybody else joining in. And this is where defensive things come from. This is where, denial and things like that. And part of my mission in life now is to try and kind of open that up, to start to have open and honest conversations. Alcohol addiction particularly is still very stigmatized. We're getting much better at talking about mental health and things like that, but it's still, funny to poke fun at people who drink too much. I think it's probably the only drug we have left where you get criticized for drinking too much, but also drinking not enough. And it's like, can you please tell me where I need to land? Sort of. And the thing is, everybody's expectations is different. So you have to do it for you, because if you try and keep everybody happy on this, it's impossible.
You've nailed just about every question I had about that subject, but there is one that I did want to touch on, because people who discover this podcast, they always go back to episode 0 because they want to find out who I am before they listen to me interview someone. Yeah. And I talk a lot in that episode about, obviously, the battles I had, my whole life basically with mental health and how I got over the other side. But anyone who messages me from that episode asking for advice, I have to nail this home with them first before I give them any sort of advices. And this is you're going to have a good idea of this too, because of alcohol especially. But quote unquote beating your addiction or whatever it is that's looming over your head, it's not the end of the road. It's actually just the start, because you're going to face judgment by people who are still in that mindset for no longer having it. And I wanted to ask you this, because I can give advice on this in my own way, because I've seen it millions of times now, because mental health's been such popularized. But with alcohol, how do you face that judgment afterwards, of whenever you officially are sober and you have to maybe go into settings where it's accepted to have alcohol but not accepted to not? How do you get over that judgment and beat the kind of devil on your shoulder telling you it's just one drink?
Absolutely. And I think, to answer as succinctly as I can, and then I'll qualify it, I think is having a sense of self around this. you know, the judgment, when you become independent of the judgment of others, and, you know, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of things where people judge me and it really goes straight to my heart. But when it comes to alcohol, I have got to the point where I genuinely don't care what other people think. So if somebody's difficult with me, or anything like that with regards to drinking, I get curious, and, you know, I'll say, why is it so important to you that I have some alcohol in my glass? And I remember almost coming to blows with an old school friend in the pub that I used to live in, because I wouldn't hear a dram from him, and he was drunk, and I had to tread very carefully around that kind of stuff. And, you know, I think it comes from just a sense of authenticity. If you get to that place where you go, I don't drink, or I don't smoke, or I don't take drugs, or I don't do whatever challenge, you know, you're trying to overcome. When you get to that place and you kind of go, I can make peace with that, then it really doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. The one thing I would say, you know, sometimes people say to me, oh, does that mean you're 100% sorted? And I say, no, absolutely not. Do I have to fight at this? Do I have to, you know, live a day at a time or any of that kind of stuff? No, absolutely not. I am 99.5% sorted, but the 0.5% scares the crap out of me, because I know I'm a big boy and I can make choices, and I can go back to being that guy whenever I want. And I just choose to remind myself that my life is so much better. And if I can just share a little Tour de France story, that kind of genuinely changed me. You know, there are moments where something will happen and you think, wow, I'm not the same person after that. And there was stage 12 of the 2018 Tour de France. So you can Google and go and see what we were up for that day. But when I said yes to the Tour de France, that was the day when they launched the route. I thought, there is no way on this planet I can physically do that. And I was right at that time. And I trained and I trained and I trained for probably about 7 months. But I always knew that when I would get to the mountains, there aren't any Alps in the UK. And I still had a huge amount of fear that when we hit the mountains, I'm going to get found out. And it's not going to be pretty. So stage 12, 3 massive mountains. And the last one was the Alpe d'Huez, which is the most iconic climb of the Tour de France, 21 hairpins. And most people who would go on a cycling holiday would go and do that climb in a day, and that would be it. And it was the final climb on a huge day. So I arrived at the bottom of the Alpe d'Huez, 113 miles in, and I'd climbed the equivalent of about between a half and 2/3 of the height of Mount Everest. And I felt okay. And I was like, wow, you know, I never thought in a million years I would be here feeling like this. And I was riding up to the bottom of the climb, and there was a food station where you could top up your water bottles and get a banana. It was 10 to 9 at night. So I knew I was going to be finishing this in the pitch black. It was probably going to take me about 2 hours to get up. We'd set off at 7 o'clock in the morning, but I felt okay until I saw all the guys who had quit for the day. And they're all sitting on the back of the kind of the tail lift of this Luton van. And they're all looking at me as if to go, what's he going to do? And I was not ready for what came next. All of a sudden, every possible excuse for giving up that I could have mustered came like an avalanche. And I was like, my arms and my wrists were really sore. And I was like, oh, well, you could take this climb off. And even silly things like, well, it'll be dark. Nobody will really know whether you did it or whether you didn't. And all of this stuff, I just got this sudden whirlwind in my head. And Yogi, the mechanic, he was filling my water bottles up, and he put them back on my bike, and he kind of snapped me out of this and went, "You're right, Andy." And I was like, yeah, completely lying. And I'm looking at these guys, and they're literally just, what are you doing, sunshine? Are you here with us? And the minute I put my leg back over the crossbar of the bike, I reminded myself why I was doing it. I came here to ride the Tour de France, not most of it. I came here to raise the money for charity. All the people who'd sponsored me thousands of pounds, I was going to have to explain to them why I didn't do this climb. And the minute I put my leg back over the crossbar, all of the sounds went away. And I set off up that climb. And it was, sure enough, it was pitch black by the time I got to the top of it. And there's cars going by and they're tooting and, go on, keep going, and all this kind of stuff, because everybody can see what you're doing. Nobody kind of takes the piss. And then there's a vehicle came up alongside, and it was the minibus, and Yogi, the mechanic, is driving. And he pulled up alongside, and it's pitch black, and I could just make him out in the sort of the light from the headlights. And he just gave me a little nod, as if to say, "Well done, son. You made a good choice there." And I looked at the back of the minibus, and all the guys were sat in the back. And I'll tell you what, if you want to know what regret looks like, it was etched on all of their faces. And I'm willing to bet that any single one of them would have got out of that minibus and got back on their bike to finish that climb. But they made a choice at the bottom that they would have regretted. Well, I can't speak for them, but if I had caved in at the bottom, I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. And it came really close. It was a proper 50-50 call. So I guess my message on this is, as you move forward from your position of pain, as you start to kind of get to a place where you feel like, you know what, I think I'm doing okay now, life will just give you choices. And just always make sure that you're clear on your why, have a clear and compelling vision about who you are, where you're going, and never take the choice that you're going to regret further down the line, even if it is deeply uncomfortable at the time.
Right, let's decompress a little here before we finish off, because I'm going to bounce around the kitchen all hyped up in adrenaline if we don't. So, Andy, is there anything that's been annoying you this week?
I think I tend to annoy me more than anything. I think I live in the online world, as do you, and I think just managing my own inabilities sometimes to kind of bring my sort of vision to life. I look at some people around that kind of just seem like they've got it all going on. They just snap their fingers and things happen, and I don't know, it always feels really hard for me. And so I spend in spite of everything that I've said about my journey and how far I've come, I still beat the crap out of myself for just that sometimes I have the inability to get out of my own way. Obviously, as we're recording this, we've had a huge general election in the UK. There's plenty of things have been annoying me this week. But I think the general kind of recurrent theme is just kind of, sometimes I just annoy the hell out of myself, but that's okay. Because I'm much kinder to myself these days, and I just kind of smile. And again, man in the mirror bit, I just kind of go, yeah, okay, I get it. Let's move on.
Andy, you're an absolute hero, and it's been nothing but a pleasure speaking to you in this conversation.
Likewise.
It's been absolutely amazing. I can't wait to publish it now.
Brilliant. I'm thrilled. I'm really thrilled.
No problem. I'll make sure all Andy's links are in the description of this, and they'll be posted all over social media and on the website. So if anyone needs them,
send me. So send it back to me. I've got about 40,000 on my email list. I've got that Facebook group with 34,000 people. I think they will eat this stuff up. I'll put it out on all my socials as well. So yeah, let's do a real nice quid pro quo on this.
No problem, Andy. And I'm sure in the future we'll have you on to talk more general and psychological effects of alcohol addiction.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to, man. You've got my details. Yeah, no, it's really been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
No problem, Andy. Have a great day. Thank you.
You too. All the best.